So the theme of this podcast is, of course, how to make life easier through mindset shifts, changes in your behaviour, and powerful practices such as NLP, mindfulness, and meditation. Well, in this episode, we're going to be focusing on mindset. We're going to take a look at the role that questions have when it comes to shifting your mindset so that you can overcome challenges with greater ease and ultimately live a more effortless life. I want to share with you 5 carefully crafted questions that when you ask them within yourself will instantly make your life easier. Hey there and welcome to the Stress Less Living podcast. My name is Stephen Burns and I've been a practicing coach, trainer and hypnotherapist for 25 years. Each week I'll share easily digestible bite-sized ideas that you can immediately put into practice so that you can live a more harmonious and balanced life. Because life is challenging, but whatever we encounter, we always have a choice. We can take the easy routes or the hard routes, the low stress way or the high stress way. Well, the Stress Less Living podcast is about always looking for the easy routes in life, the low stress ways to accomplish your goals, get more of what you want, and ultimately live a happy and more effortless life. So if you're looking for the perfect antidote for the chaos of modern life, my friend, you are absolutely in the right place. So before we take a look at the 5 questions, I want to start off by talking about why asking yourself questions can be such a powerful practice, especially when you ask them in a particular way. So a lot of people think that the main role of a question is to gather information. And that can be true, of course. If you want directions to the nearest ATM, then you ask a friendly-looking citizen where you're supposed to go. Or if you're trying to remind yourself where you left your car keys, then you might ask yourself that question so you can retrieve the information. It doesn't mean that you're crazy. You don't have to get yourself checked out. It's just what we do. But viewing questions as only a way to gather information is severely limiting. That the most powerful function of a question is when you use it to guide thinking. As a coach, I do this all the time. I am interested in what people have to say, of course, but when I ask questions, the prime motivation is actually to steer their thinking, to shift their experience to a more useful place. So when we ask questions within ourselves, which is the topic of this episode, we should be doing it with that purpose in mind. You know, one of my mentors and teachers, a lady called Christina Hall, used to say that whenever you ask a question, you will either be reinforcing the problem or challenge that you're facing, adding layers to it, or opening yourself up to new potentials and new possibilities. And as much as you can, you want to be doing the latter. To give you an example, say you were to think back to a time in your past where you failed. Maybe you got rejected, or you failed to meet your own standards, or something just didn't go the way that you wanted it to go. If you think back to that time now, what kind of questions were going through your head at the time? You know, most people say it's things like, why do things never work out for me? Or why am I such a loser? Or what did I do wrong? Or other cheery variations. But if you were to ask yourself a different question, a question like this: what important learning can I glean from this that will allow me to become a happier and better person in the future? If you were to have asked yourself that question instead, it would have shed a completely different light on that apparent failure, wouldn't it? In fact, when you truly, fully consider this question, you'll no longer see that experience as a failure. It will become part of the learning process. It has to. It will become an aid to you becoming a better and more resourceful person. Well, that's how powerful questions can be. So it's crucial to start asking yourself a higher quality of questions. As self-help mega guru Tony Robbins once said, the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions that you ask. And that's what this episode is all about. So another reason why asking questions within yourself can be so powerful is because of something called the Zeigarnik effect. So I actually talk about the Zeigarnik effect in a previous episode where I look at how to deal with distractions. If you want to check that out, it's episode number 17. But basically, the idea is that the brain loves closure. In fact, it needs closure. And if we don't get it, then we'll continue searching away in the background until we do get that closure. So whenever we ask ourselves a question, we open up a loop inside our minds. And in order to close it, our brain continues to search away in the background for a suitable answer. And that's why if you're struggling with a challenge or you find yourself in a stuck place, we can often get an aha moment later on when we're in the bath or going for a walk or a run, because our brain has been working away on that problem subconsciously. And then when you let go, when you just fall into more of an incubation period, all of a sudden, it comes up with an answer. And research has shown this, that we continue to search for answers to a question long after we pose it. So asking carefully crafted questions is, in essence, a creativity tool that can help us get insight into issues and challenges that we're facing. Okay, so let's get into this, shall we? We're going to take a look at 5 questions that, when asked, will instantly make your life better. So, question number 1. What would this look like if this were easy? So I got this one from Tim Ferriss, who wrote the famous book, The 4-Hour Working Week. So he says that whenever he feels stressed or stretched thin or overwhelmed, it's almost always because he's overcomplicating things, or he's become temporarily blind to the easier path. So when he notices this, he just stops, takes a few deep breaths, and asks, what would this look like if this were easy? And almost always an easier and more simple solution presents itself. And this is so true, right? You know, as human beings, we have this incredible ability to overthink, overcomplicate, and turn simple tasks into arduous struggles. Life can, of course, be challenging and difficult, but almost always there will be an easier and more simple way to do things, but we don't often see it. So this question cuts through all of the unnecessary complexity and just gets right to it. So I use this a lot in business. So a few years ago, I decided to get into a thing called a funnel. So in case you don't know, a funnel is basically a way of leading people from your free content to paid, so they become a customer. So I wanted to implement this idea in my business, and I massively overcomplicated it. At one point, I had like 15 different funnels for different products, and they were all interacting with each other, and the whole thing was just super confusing for me, but also for my potential customer. And it wasn't really working either. So I decided, okay, I need to take a look at this. And I asked that question, what would this look like if this were easy? And I was like, you know what? At the end of the day, business is all about figuring out what people want, what they need, and then just creating something that helps them. At the end of the day, that is it. And this insight helped me take my business and make it a lot simpler and a lot clearer. I stripped away all of the unnecessary complexity. It was 15 funnels, no more. And I focused on listening to what people want and then just have 1 or 2 funnels that led them in that direction. So for me, this is a great question, especially if you're someone who has the tendency to overcomplicate things, or if you believe that things should be hard or should be difficult. So that's a great question. You want to use that anytime you are overthinking or overcomplicating things, or if you're just a little bit stuck and you can't quite figure out how to make things work. So that's question number 1. Question number 2 is, what greater purpose does this serve? I love this question. So this is a question you want to ask yourself in relation to your goals or a new direction that you want to take. You can also use it whenever you're looking to make a decision about something. So ultimately, everything that we do in an ideal world should fit into some kind of greater purpose. And if it doesn't, then that goal, life path, or decision will most likely lack meaning and end up not feeling that worthwhile. And I'm sure you've seen this play out, right? You know, there are many people out there who are successful, they have lots of money, lots of material wealth, they're very successful in their job or their career, but they are, behind the scenes, actually miserable. They hate their life. And also, on the flip side, there are people who haven't achieved that much, relatively speaking, but they're happy. They feel aligned with what they're doing. Their life has meaning. And almost always the difference is that with the first group, what they're doing doesn't fit into any kind of greater or more meaningful purpose. So it just feels like they're going through the motions. There's no juice in what they're doing. You also see this a lot with people who succumb to peer pressure when they make decisions about what they want to do with their life, that they end up just chasing after somebody else's version of success or somebody else's version of happiness rather than their own. There's a great story, you've maybe heard this before, about a famous basketball player from the 60s called Walt Chamberlain. So he has the highest success ratio for free shot throws. So in basketball, if you get fouled, then you get the chance to shoot unimpeded from a set distance. So he had the most highest success ratio for those throws. And the reason why was because he had a very unusual style of throw. He would throw it underarm. And this was apparently referred to as a granny shot because no one did it other than your gran, I guess. I've never seen my gran play basketball, but fair enough. But everyone tried to change him. They wanted to get him to throw in the conventional manner, which was overarm. And then during one closed season, he succumbed to that pressure and he changed it to overarm. And guess what happened? His ratio absolutely plummeted. He was no longer good at doing free shot throws. Why? Because he changed from what felt natural and a good fit for him. And I love this story. I think it's a warning. When we let peer pressure dictate our decisions like this, it rarely leads to anything good. You want to choose goals and make important decisions from the inside out. So by asking yourself this question, what greater purpose does this serve? You avoid falling into both of those traps. It acts as a great test to make sure that what you're doing fits in with something more meaningful. Every goal that you choose, every decision that you make, every new life path that you embark on should be passed through that question. It helps to see if the decision you're about to make is going to fit with you at a deeper level, if it's going to lead to something worthwhile. And if it's not, what's the point in doing it? So this also helps you stop wasting time and resources as well. I don't know about you, but the older I get, the more annoyed I get when I waste time. It's one of the biggest gripes I have on a daily basis. I want to make the best use of the time that I have. And this question is amazing for doing that. So again, this is one I use quite a lot in business, especially to evaluate new opportunities. So in the past, I used to suffer from what I refer to as shiny new object syndrome. So this is where you continually chase new opportunities and you end up just going round in circles. So I would see something that looked cool, get excited about it, and then I would just head down that rabbit hole. Then after a while, I'd see something else that looked cool and I would do the exact same, rinse and repeat. I'm sure you get the picture. And in the long term, I just wasn't really making much progress. I was going round and round in circles. So now, whenever a new opportunity presents itself, I ask myself that question: what greater purpose does or could this serve? And this tests to see if it's going to be worth the investment in time, but also the investment potentially in money as well. Is this part of a greater and more meaningful plan for me and for my business? Could it fit into a larger and more global direction I'm heading in? So amazing question, a few variations in there of course, but it can help you save a ton of time chasing new shiny objects if that's the kind of thing that you do. So another thing this question does, and I'm spending quite a bit of time on this one because I think it's really important, it's very powerful, but another thing it does is it also helps you connect with deeper layers of meaning and satisfaction within the things that you're already doing. So for example, say your goal was to get fit and healthy. That's a good goal, right? But you can make it even more powerful by asking that question: what greater purpose does this fit into? So maybe it's going to help you become more attractive. Maybe it's going to help you have more energy. And this would then lead to you living a more vibrant and ultimately fulfilling life. Or maybe it's to attract a partner so that you can have an amazing relationship and experience some deep form of connection. So as I'm sure you noticed there, when you ask this question, you start to connect your goals and your actions to your deeper values, intentions, and purposes. And this gives the goal so much more power, more oomph. So a great question, and one you definitely want to add to your repertoire. Are you someone who struggles with work-life balance? You find it difficult to maintain harmony between career ambitions and your personal well-being. You're doing your best to balance demands and deadlines with the other important aspects of your life, but things like burnout, stress, and a nagging sense of guilt seem to forever lurk in the background. Well, one of the very best first steps that you can do to create more balance is to do a full life audit. This is a powerful process that helps you highlight areas of your life that are a little bit out of sync and need to be addressed so that you can return to a more harmonious place. So if you want to do a life audit, then I have a free PDF that will take you through the entire thing. To get access to that, please check the show notes. You'll see a link and all the information you need. So that's question number 2, and question number 3 is, what's great about this? So this is an amazing question to ask, especially if you've had a bad experience. So maybe you've failed, or something doesn't quite meet your expectation, or you have a disappointment, a setback, or even a crisis. In other words, something happens that you would label as bad. So when this happens, the impulse is often to slip into the victim mindset. So we start saying things like, why did this happen to me? This is awful. This is going to affect me for such a long time, or I'm never going to get over this. Or we link it to our ego and decide that clearly this means that we're not good enough, we're simply not worthy. That in other words, we get locked into thinking only about the negative, and it can be like a chain of negatives if we continue down this path. So the very last thing that we tend to consider in that moment is that there could in fact be something positive about this experience. That in actual fact, it might not be a bad experience at all. It could be a great one. So when we ask the question, what's great about this? It can get us to consider the exact opposite of what we're thinking, and this can flip us out of all of that negativity. So it's kind of like a pattern interrupt. You know, as human beings, we run patterns, we run programs, and we can get so good at these patterns that they end up happening automatically. And one of the patterns that people tend to run, especially after they've had a bad experience, is a negativity pattern, where, like I said, we slip into the victim mindset. So by asking the question, what's great about this? It jolts us out of this pattern and it takes our mind into a more positive space. We start to consider things that were previously blocked out. So just to give you an example of this, so about 4 years ago, something happened in my business that caused my income to be significantly reduced. So without going into the details, due to an unexpected event, my income dropped by 75% pretty much overnight. In fact, it was overnight with a click of a button. And this also happened 3 weeks before Christmas as well. So I was looking forward to a nice, relaxed, chilled out Christmas, and all of a sudden, everything was plunged into chaos and anxiety. So I was freaking out, right? I was like, man, this is going to be a total nightmare. There's so much struggle ahead. This next year is going to be so dark and so difficult. And I was starting to get into a bit of a dark place. But the thing that saved me was that question. So I stopped for a moment and I was like, okay, let's just take a few deep breaths. Let's just distance myself from this. And then I asked, what's great about this? And the first thing came to my mind was, nothing. This is absolutely horrendous. It's the worst thing that could happen. And this can often be the case because your mind is so locked into the negative. So if that happens with you, you want to keep asking the question. Don't just ask it once. You want to ask it several times until your brain starts to get it. So I did that. I kept on asking myself the question, what's great about this? And eventually a more positive answer came back. And the thought that came to mind was, you know what, maybe this is actually a great time to totally reinvent the way that you approach business. Maybe this is the kick up the arse you really need to actually go for it next year, but do it in a way that's a bit more innovative. I thought, maybe this is an opportunity in disguise. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting take. I hadn't thought about that before. And what I found was over the festive period that year, I used it to reflect deeply on how I was approaching business, how I was approaching life in general. I used it to learn a lot more about business. And then when January hit, I felt like I was ready, and I actually recovered reasonably quickly and ended up in a much stronger position by the end of that year. And I don't think I would have been able to do that if I hadn't asked that question. So that's an amazing one to keep in mind, especially if you've gone through an experience that you've labelled as bad. So that's question number 3, and question number 4 is a variation of that one. And it's also one I dropped in earlier on in the podcast, and that is, what important learning can I glean from this that will allow me to become a better and a happier person in the future? So a bit more wordy than the previous one, but I think it's still a great question. In fact, in many ways, it's an even better question. What important learning can I glean from this that will allow me to become a better and happier person in the future? So again, this is one that you want to use after an experience that you've labelled as bad. And it works on the same principle as question number 3, but it's just a bit more targeted. So whenever we have a so-called bad experience, we can have a tendency to hold on to that bad feeling for a long time, way longer than what we need to. There's a thing I read recently actually about how animals in the wild deal with traumatic events. That what they do is they go off to a secluded spot and they physically shake it off. So you'll actually see them physically shaking. And once they're done, they just return to normal. But the thing is, as human beings, we have this tremendous ability to hold on to things for days, weeks, and potentially years. We often struggle to shake things off. That pain gets locked in. And one of the reasons why we hold on to stuff is because we haven't learned something useful from the experience that we can use, that when we glean some kind of useful learning from an event that's happened to us, it transforms it from a bad event to a useful event, and the brain gets the signal to let it go. It also gives us some kind of closure as well. I talked about this earlier on when I mentioned the Zeigarnik effect, that the brain needs closure. So when we extract some kind of useful learning from the experience, the brain gets the signal to close that loop because the event has served its purpose, or at the very least, it served some kind of purpose. So if you want to try this out, just stop for a moment and think of some event or some past experience that you've labelled as bad. Nothing too traumatic or anything like that. No, mummy took the spoon away when I was 5 and I've never been the same since. Leave that for therapy. But perhaps it's a disappointment, a failure, a setback, or maybe a mini crisis. And then once you've brought the memory of that to mind, I want you just to look on as if you're a neutral observer looking on from a slightly more objective place. And I want you to ask that question: what important learning can I glean from this that will allow me to become a better and a happier person in the future? And again, it's best to ask this a few times. You often don't get the answer straight away, but if you reflect on it deeply and intensely, something will eventually come to mind. And this can often be quite profound. And then from there, you can actually take this a step further and ask yourself, what would it be like if I were to integrate this new learning into my life? And see where considering this takes your mind. You might want to project off into the future and imagine what that would be like if you were fully integrating that new learning. And often when you get this, and like I said, it does take a wee bit of time to reflect on it, but when you do, this can lead to such a tremendous release. The label that you previously attached to the event just seems to lift, and you no longer see it as bad. It can become a blessing, a springboard for your future growth. So that's question 4, amazing question that has gotten me out of the mire so many times. What important learning can I glean from this that will allow me to become a better and happier person in the future? So the 5th and final question is this one here, and that is, what would it be like if you were completely okay right now? So whenever we go after the things that we want in life, it can be easy to fall into what I call the deficiency trap. So this is where we go after our goals and the things that we want in order to fill a void. Now in truth, I think there's always going to be a little bit of that. I don't think we can get rid of that void in its entirety. But you do want to be going after your goals and the things that you want from a position of strength rather than a position of weakness. You never want to be going after something in order to fill some kind of gaping wound or void in your psyche. That's never going to work out that well. So a classic example of this is in dating. You know what this is like, right? I think everyone has had an experience like this. If you're super unhappy about being on your own, you really want to meet someone, you can end up coming across as super needy or even desperate. And what happens? Instead of attracting people, you end up repelling them, or you attract the very wrong type of person for you. So you end up pushing away the quality people, because people who do have their stuff together will run a mile if they sense neediness or desperation. So as the old relationship advice goes, you need to learn to be happy on your own first, and that then becomes attractive because you have more to give. You're not looking to take from someone else's life just to be okay. Instead, you'll be adding something to their life because you're doing it from a position of being fulfilled, a position of strength. And this is a much more attractive quality. So this is exactly the same with all of our goals. As much as you can, you want to be going after them from a place of resourcefulness and strength. It makes them so much easier to achieve. And one of the best ways to start cultivating this attitude is to consider the question, what would it be like if you were completely okay right now? Because this takes your mind to a space where you feel contentment before you go after what you want. And of course, it doesn't mean that you don't go after your goals and just be contented sitting in your house doing nothing. You still do want to go after what you want, but you're doing it from a position of strength and resourcefulness rather than a position of neediness. Because anything you achieve from this space will be in addition to your okayness. From this space, your goals add to your life rather than being prerequisites to your happiness. So for me, I like to think of this as shifting your focus from needing something to wanting it. When we need something, we're going after it to fill a gaping psychological void, and this is a weak place to live life from. But when we want something, it implies that we are already okay, and we want something in addition to that okayness. So consider that question, really powerful. What would it be like if you were completely okay right now? And this is one I like to write down and consider it just before I go to bed at night. And I just reflect on it before I fall asleep. And I go to sleep with this beautiful feeling of being happy, fulfilled, and blissful. I also think this is a truer reflection of reality as well. I do believe that our default state is one of natural bliss and happiness, but we get tricked into thinking that we are psychologically deficient. So this question takes us back to this natural and blissful place. So there we have it. That is the 5 questions. Let's quickly recap. Question number 1, what if this were easy? Question number 2, what greater purpose does this serve? Question number 3, what's great about this? Question number 4, what important learning can I glean from this that will allow me to become a better and happier person in the future? And question number 5, what would it be like if you were completely okay right now? So that's the 5 questions. Hope you enjoyed them. The power that carefully crafted questions possess is absolutely incredible. Einstein once said that you can't solve a problem from the same level of thinking that was used to create it. That in order to solve it, you have to elevate your thinking. And I think the way to elevate your thinking is by asking better questions. So thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, then please do subscribe or follow wherever you listen to your podcasts. So thank you once again, and I'll speak to you in the next episode.